going back to the beginning of the apocalypse with suspense that puts you on the edge of your seat to the point you don't even want to eat your popcorn. Welcome to Easily Entertained. I'm your host, Bryson Olson, here to talk to you about all things entertainment. Today we are talking A Quiet Place Day 1. I'm a huge fan of the Quiet Place franchise, so I was really excited for the announcement of this prequel, and I was anxiously waiting the entire time for it to finally be released so we could get that perspective of the first day of the silent apocalypse. So let's start with the beginning of the end. At the beginning of A Quiet Place 2, we kind of saw a bit more of what it was like for the beginning of the Death Angels arriving. If you don't know, the Death Angels are the fan name for the creatures that come down and attack everybody in A Quiet Place. It hasn't really been confirmed as their canon name, but to everyone, I believe, including a lot of interviewers, Death Angels is what they get referred as. So anyways, the Death Angels arriving, and it goes by very fast in A Quiet Place 2, and plus they're in a small town, so it makes an impact, but it's not as drastic as it could have been, hence why Day 1 exists. Day 1 takes place in New York, and obviously very noisy place. They have a little disclaimer at the beginning of the movie saying that New York averages around 90 decibels, which is basically the equivalent to a constant scream. So it's a pretty loud place. And, Day 1 covers the events of, obviously, the first days of the apocalypse. So you follow a few of our main characters as they try to survive the thick of it, as they're in an area where there's probably at least 100 Death Angels roaming the city. And so you're just hoping they can make it out alive, because they're kind of in the Manhattan area, so they're kind of secluded, and they shoot down the bridges so that they can't get out because the Death Angels can't swim, and it's wild. So we follow our main character, Sam, and she's who we follow for most of the movie. She's played by Lupita Nyong, which she does a great job. She is absolutely fantastic, and her character is dying from cancer and is kind of just waiting to die. They gave her 2 years max to live. It's been 2 years, so she's kind of just waiting, and with the apocalypse suddenly arriving, she is living to accomplish a single goal, which is to get pizza in Harlem from a place that she used to visit with her dad. And so obviously she's already a very vulnerable character, plus they give her another character, Eric, who she meets along the way. He's a foreign exchange lawyer, and she also has a service cat, which amazingly never dies in the movie. I don't know how that ever happens, but and thank goodness, because animals dying in movies always sucks. So already we've kind of raised the stakes because we have such vulnerable characters. We don't want the animal to die because that sucks, and we don't want Eric to die as well because we want him to make it out. Obviously we want Sam to reach her goal, but she's kind of accepted her fate, and so you're not entirely predicting that she's going to die, but rather, if she gets put in a scenario, she may not be opposed to sacrificing herself. And so you kind of get that idea that at some point in the film, she may die. She doesn't really die. At least we don't see it on screen. And this gives us, as the audience, a much different way to follow the characters, and it gives us different kinds of tension since we have an idea of what the outcome already is for the movie. And so, speaking of tension, let's get into that part of the film. So let's talk about the return of tension. Like I said in the beginning, I'm a huge fan of the Quiet Place franchise. It is one of my favorites. I think it's so good. They are masters of suspense and making your heart spike even when you know something is coming. And it's not like other horror movies. And with Day 1, it felt very much like the first movie to me, especially seeing it in the theater. Much like the first one, there were moments of sheer quiet where the aliens are near and they're searching for the characters, and it's so unbelievably tense that you also, even as a viewer, don't want to make any sound. I found that myself and a lot of other people that I was in the theater with, everyone's super quiet. Like, you don't want to crunch on your popcorn because that's too loud. And so that experience for me is very much like the first one. And I love the second one as well. I think both are great. And I like this one as well as the first one. And, you know, I like them in similar kind of circumstances because it has those tense moments. A Quiet Place Part 2 has those tense moments, but I feel like the first one has them the most as well as this one. And so I like that it focuses on the relationships in the second one and less the aliens, but, you know, it's not bad. It's just different ways of telling this kind of story. And I think that's why the first two do so well, is they focus a lot on characters. The first one just does it with a lot more suspense, and then the second one, kind of, since they already know how to kill the creatures, they just like use it to develop the characters even more, which I like. But, you know, a huge challenge for these movies is managing to scare you without it being too overbearing. A lot of horror / like thriller movies use jump scares in a way that are way too frequent, and then none of the scares really hit that hard. Whereas like movies like the Quiet Place series, The Conjuring, Talk to Me, they actually make you wait for the scare, and, you know, they'll build up the tension, and sometimes they don't even release it, which makes it that much scarier. So the scare doesn't come when you expect it, and now you're on edge the entire time until the next big thing. And sometimes, you know, they'll bring it back down, and then without giving you any rise, it'll suddenly just happen and it scares you. And that is the kind of like scares that I really enjoy in horror and thrillers, because it's not like as predictable. It's a bit more random, even when you're trying to expect it. And Day One, I think, does that especially well, as the characters are not as adept at silence as the first movies had. In the first movies, the Abbotts obviously know sign language because of their daughter, and this helps them better adapt to a silent world because they can still collaborate without talking. However, in Day One, they don't have that as the characters don't have that as a skill set, and so to communicate for them, they have to find louder sounds such as like running water and speak under it in order to actually talk to each other or write things down, which, you know, writing could potentially be loud as well. So it just makes things even extra tense because they struggle not to make any sound because it's nearly impossible. And that brings us to our last point, which is the scariest apocalypse. In movies, there are a lot of different kinds of apocalypses. You obviously have ones where like Mother Nature rebels, you have zombies, viruses, aliens, destroying the climate, losing major resources, whatever. There's a whole lot of apocalypse movies. And A Quiet Place technically fits into the alien apocalypse category. However, it does it in a way that I think is much scarier than most other alien invasion stories, which is through silence. The world around us in real life as well is constantly making sound, both intentionally as well as unintentionally. In a world where there are aliens with ultrasonic hearing, they can literally hear everything, there is no real escape. We see in Day One a much bigger sense of how the aliens crashed and how many of them there were. And so, like, across the planet, there may be tens of thousands, maybe even more around. We only saw in the small area, there's probably around 100, maybe a little bit more, maybe a little bit less. But that's just in this one area, and they have crashed along the entire planet. And so that kind of gives you a sheer scale size of how big this invasion is. And they move incredibly fast. They have indestructible armor, and they hear everything. And that is a very terrifying adversary for humankind. And although they do it in the movies, it's so difficult. It's so difficult to hide, let alone hiding for years. And, you know, just think about how involuntary some of the sounds your body makes just on the daily. You can't ever sneeze, you can't cough, you can't burp, you can't fart, you can't sniff like when you're crying, you can't clear your throat. None of that. You can never do that again. And that is just like a short list. There's plenty more sounds that could occur. Like, just think, when you get hungry and your stomach growls, we as humans can hear it in other humans. Imagine an alien who can hear that from miles away. It's over. You're done for. That's it. You're not living anymore because you were just hungry. And granted, in the movies, they kind of like scale it back quite a bit because, you know, pretty much all life other than like plants and insects would die almost immediately. But it's this kind of vast scale and effect and destruction that puts the Quiet Place apocalypse like on a whole different level compared to other apocalypses, just making it so much harder to survive when you're trying. Even when you're trying, makes this situation all the scarier, and it's what makes the Quiet Place franchise so successful as a thriller franchise. It's not like a zombie movie where like it's mainly the characters that are dumb, because zombies would be pretty easy to defeat. The Mother Nature ones are maybe not as easy to defeat, obviously, because like you can't really do anything about it. It's like natural disaster type stuff. But it's these ones where like we have sort of a chance, but it is not very high and it's not very likely, that makes it so scary. And it's this continued success of suspense combined with, you know, the original story, the constant adrenaline that really gives the Quiet Place series, as well as A Quiet Place Day One, its edge, and still manages to leave you easily entertained. So let's get into our rating of A Quiet Place Day One, which, if you don't know our scale, from least to worst, it goes garbage, once is fine, right mood, quotable, go to, and all day, every day. And I'm going to put Day One as a go-to. I think it is excellently well done, but the first two I think are for sure an all day, every day. And, you know, this one is still pretty good. I think the first ones kind of have a lead. I think it's that family story that just pushes it. It really connects you with the characters. And I think the story in Day One, it's still really good and it's still pretty compelling. But having a family unit where you want the entire family to make it out, I think is just a bit stronger, putting that one at an all day, every day, while Day One, I think, is more go-to. And, you know, maybe I'll put it higher later as I kind of grow to like it. But for now, it's going in as a go-to. And before we go, we have our question of the week, designed to get you involved with this week's topic. And since we're talking about A Quiet Place, how long would you survive in a quiet place? I probably wouldn't last very long. Like I said, those kind of like involuntary type sounds, I don't think that would work well in my favor. I'm going to be completely honest with you. I sneeze probably once a day, maybe once every other day, and that alone would get me caught. Even if I'm trying to like do that weird like holding in where you're like, that's not going to work. I don't think that'll be as helpful as I really wanted it to be. So that will probably get me killed. But, you know, it's kind of the way it is. So let us know how long you think you would survive in a quiet place down in the comments here on YouTube, Spotify, Instagram, wherever. Just let us know. And that is it for this week's episode of Easily Entertained. I hope you enjoyed. If you did, leave us a like, leave us a follow, so you can get notified of all the latest episodes as they come out, so you can hear all about entertainment. It's always a good time. And until next time, bye. You have been entertained.